Hello everyone and welcome back to Destiny Tunes. It's Destiny here. So it's been a very long time since I've seen any regularly scheduled cartoon series because most of the animated content I'm familiar with has either aired already or are pieces that you can find on the internet. Now, all of this leads me to ask if cartoons nowadays are still making drug and alcohol awareness episodes. Because growing up in the early 2000s meant that there were awareness episodes for almost everything ranging from periods, drugs, bullying, and even school shootings. Now, it's very obvious why we would have had more of these PSA-style episodes, considering the fact that things like school shootings were first starting to occur, but also with the raging drug epidemic between the 80s to the early 2000s, episodes like these were the country's best attempt to keep children away from drugs. When it comes to the current day, the biggest epidemic I could think of is probably that of vaping, and if that's the case, there have definitely been anti-vaping commercials that I've seen, but we have yet to see any animated series actually trying to tackle the topic of the dangers of not only vaping, but also what addiction can do to the young body and mind. The biggest question I have in making this video is whether or not these sort of drug and alcohol awareness episodes actually did anything beneficial. Because throughout the many decades, there have been countless awareness episodes, some that were done in a lighthearted manner, while others were filled with terrifyingly dark imagery. Is there a sort of episode that does better with its messaging, and are there others that should have never aired in the first place? These are the sort of things that I want to go over in this video. So without further ado, let's do a dive into some of these drug and alcohol awareness episodes and come up with our own personal opinion on whether or not they would have been beneficial or detrimental to their young audiences. So the most common type of awareness episodes you would have seen in animation are the ones that focused more on educating the viewer rather than instilling them with fear. Braceface is a perfect example of a series that tried its hardest to educate the viewer on the consequences of consuming drugs or alcohol that would best fit their age demographic. I feel like trying to be as realistic as possible is what's going to stick the most with children. As you'll see in some of the episodes that I talk about in this video, their messaging is really fear-driven and they definitely push it to the extreme. But I feel like children are more likely to understand a concept when they can actually see the negative aspects of it affecting their day-to-day life. Braceface has produced 2 episodes warning their viewers of drug and alcohol usage titled Up in Smoke and Miami Vices. This series has never been afraid of allowing their main character to be the bad guy in these PSA-styled episodes. It isn't very common that our main character will be the one who is taking part in these bad behaviors, but in Braceface, Sharon is continuously putting herself in situations that require her to be corrected. It's important that children see their favorite characters not only being reprimanded by those around them, but also see them take accountability for their negative actions. In the episode titled Up in Smoke, Sharon ends up trying a cigarette and quickly finds out that it isn't for her. Although she only tries the cigarette one time, the series still makes it a point to emphasize her parents' and friends' disappointment in her. The segment with Sharon's family and friends scolding her is the most important part of this episode, because as they warn her of the long-term effects of smoking, like lung cancer or how tobacco companies purposely trick their customers, the viewers are able to consume this information that isn't usually common in these sort of episodes. As someone who is in the DARE program, they really do go into detail about all of the dangers pertaining to drugs and alcohol, but when it comes to these drug and alcohol awareness cartoon episodes, a lot of the times they boil the consequences down to it not being cool. So I think that it was really impressive that the directors of Braceface highlighted other consequences like how drugs and alcohol can alter your thinking process, which could lead you to being put in vulnerable situations where children, teenagers, and adults can be taken advantage of. Personally, I think that Braceface did an exceptional job at trying to deliver these messages because they didn't go overboard with the fear tactics. It was just enough so that the viewers could physically see the state that drugs and alcohol could leave someone in, but not to the point where it's going to give them nightmares. Sharon having a solid support system of people around her, stemming from both her family and friends, is also something that I really liked about these sort of episodes. It's important that there's someone in Sharon's corner who is constantly level-headed in these situations. You know, the voice of reason. If Sharon wasn't consistently being put in her place and given ample consequences to her actions, it could really give off the wrong message in these episodes. There's a part in the episode Up in Smoke where Sharon's parents say that they want her to know how serious they are about making sure she understands just how crucial it is that she stays away from cigarettes. And I think that it's a really nice touch that they added this, because children being able to see just how disappointed and frustrated their parents could be if they were put in the same situation could definitely add into the reasons why they would want to stay away from drugs and alcohol. But unfortunately, when it comes to Braceface and Sharon as a character, she has a horrible problem with peer pressure, and as much as I appreciate the fact that they even shine the light on issues like peer pressure, I wish that there would be instances where this character was strong enough to just say no. Although I do find it to be very important that kids get to see characters being reprimanded and punished for their bad behaviors, I think that it's equally important that children see their favorite characters being able to stand up for themselves and make the best decisions in situations. Unfortunately, in Braceface, a lot of the times, Sharon is not this kind of character. Now, unlike Braceface, in the episode of Buzz Lightyear of Star Command titled Supernova, the message against drug usage wasn't presented with cigarettes or alcohol, but rather through the topic of addiction with an energy source that could be compared to a drug. I'm throwing Buzz Lightyear of Star Command with Braceface because it's the other most family-friendly episode that I have in this video, and from what I can remember, Disney wasn't the sort of network to have a lot of these PSA-styled episodes, and if they did, they were usually focused around bullying, sexism, or racism, and hardly any of them were ever from their original animated series. It was really interesting to see that there was a Disney Channel episode that tried to tackle the topic of addiction, because I feel as if it is a little heavier than the topics that were discussed in Braceface. The issue that I had with this episode, though, was the fact that it didn't feel serious enough to me. And listen, I completely understand that this isn't targeted towards adults, so obviously I would feel that way. But I also feel like the message within this episode could definitely be lost with children. Throughout this episode, we see that Mira is essentially high off of this energy source, and because of that, she appears to be a lot more active, constantly cleaning around the ship and talking really quickly. The hyper way that she's acting feels silly to me, and I can imagine that children watching this episode would also find her behavior to be more funny than concerning. It isn't really until the end of the episode that they start to take things more seriously, when we start to see Mira declining both physically and mentally. The topic of addiction is a very challenging and fragile one, and the fact that they even tried to cover this in a Disney series felt extremely risky to me. Like, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of warning signs given throughout this episode, and it's clear that what Mira was doing was wrong, but I feel like there were so many other routes that they could have went in when trying to warn their young viewers about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. I don't really blame anyone who worked on Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, because I'm sure that there were really strict guidelines that they had to follow, considering the fact that it is a Disney series. There weren't any other animated series that I remember that even tried to touch on a topic like addiction, but then again, a lot of the early animated series on Disney were heavily neglected, so that could definitely be a reason why. Now, when it comes to older series and their attempts at making these drug and alcohol awareness episodes, they can be far darker than the episodes that I've talked about already, and I mean a hell of a lot darker. So we'll start off a little tame with the episode of Tiny Toons titled One Beer. Now, I kind of had the same issue with this episode that I did with Supernova, in the sense that it almost felt as if they were playing a little bit too much. And I get it, it's Looney Tunes, when have they ever done anything in a serious manner? This episode pretty much included the standard warnings and effects that we see from other anti-alcohol episodes, like altering your physical and mental state and it being uncool. but it did do something that I'd never seen any other animated series do when putting out their PSA styled episode, and that is including drunk driving. It's episodes like these that make me really question whether or not they should have been aired in the first place, because although I understand where they're coming from, the way that the episode and the message is presented, it just feels way too lighthearted in the sense that it can almost come off a little bit like they're having more fun than they are in actual danger. I don't know, this one feels like it could be more detrimental than beneficial in my opinion. This is also the first episode in this video that dances around the idea of death in relation to alcohol or drug consumption, and even if the death isn't permanent, believe me, it's only going to get darker from here. The 80s and 90s were no joke when it came to the ways that they put out these anti-drug and alcohol episodes, because it definitely dances on the line of being educational and flat out nightmare fuel. Now, Captain Planet and the Planeteers did not mess around when it came to these educational episodes, and Mind Pollution was no exception because this episode was absolutely crazy. Not to mention, this episode was the first time that I'd ever seen an actual drug dealer in an animated series, and goodness, yeah, he was pretty creepy. And seeing the way that this drug dealer was purposely targeting people who were going through a hardship was a really good touch, because people who are in vulnerable positions are more subject to falling victim to drug or alcohol usage, so I liked that it was realistic in that aspect. Once we see the character named Boris take these drugs, everything goes from 0 to 100. Because of Boris's violent outbursts, he ends up causing a full-on alcohol fire. He ends up drugging his cousin by putting drugs in her food, leaving her to become addicted as well. We also see him struggle with the effects of withdrawal, and he even swan dives through a window, and the glass ends up slicing both of his arms, leaving a pool of blood on the floor. Listen, I felt like this was absolutely ridiculous and unnecessary, because young viewers don't need to see someone literally bleeding out on the floor, but that's nor here or there, because after all of this, Boris ends up dying due to overdosing. I do appreciate what this episode was trying to do, but I just feel as if they could have done it in a million other ways that weren't as graphic or fear-inducing as this episode was. I was completely prepared for the episode to be purely educational, but found that it was extremely dramatized, because why did there need to be a full-on drug/zombie outbreak where characters are storming the Capitol building? And the way that they presented the entire episode, it just felt extremely unrealistic, to the point where it felt unlikely to happen to anyone ever. And the crazy thing is, this isn't the first or only time these drug awareness episodes ended in death due to overdosing. The episode of BraveStarr titled The Price was also pretty dark. Very early on in this episode, we have to witness the horrifying screaming of a character who is addicted to drugs. And when I say it's horrifying, just listen.
Now, calm down, Fane. There's no spiders. It's just spin, the drug you took, making you see things. You want to eat me? But I'll let you. Gotcha.
Now, there were things that I liked a lot about this episode, like the way that they focused on the emotional burden that doing drugs can put on the people around you, as well as the fact that BraveStarr says something along the lines of nobody wants to be an addict, which I feel like none of the other episodes say or ever focus on, because at the end of the day, addiction is an actual disease, not a path that people want to go down purposely. The imagery throughout this episode was really off-putting though. Seeing the character Jay stealing from his family, violently lashing out towards his friends, we also see him fiend for drugs, and unfortunately he loses his life due to overdosing. Jay losing his life was really sad to see, especially considering the fact that he was so young. But I think it was equally as sad seeing how guilty his friend was for not speaking up sooner. These two episodes definitely did have a darkness about them, and the way that they were trying to put their message out was definitely rooted in fear. But I do have to also remember that during the time that these episodes came out, the country was dealing with a crazy drug epidemic, so there probably was a level of desperation in trying to make sure that the youth of the time didn't end up contributing to that epidemic. I feel like if I were to see these episodes as a child, they would have definitely scared me, and that's about it. I personally feel like the Braceface episodes would have done a far better job of actually educating me on why doing drugs or drinking alcohol was bad in a way that would stick, especially considering the fact that the consequences were more fitting for a person around that age range. What do you think? Are the episodes that focus more on educating rather than fear tactics more likely to have their message stick with their intended audiences? Or do you think that scaring their audiences are more likely to keep them in line? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, let me know that you did by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you never miss a video in the future. Thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!